Hey everybody, this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. I'm Carissa, and today I'm with Jennifer Michael Hecht. And we're going to talk about her new book, The Wonder Paradox, Embracing the Weirdness of Existence and the Poetry of Our Lives. And so just a brief introduction of Jennifer. She is a historian. I first found out about her work through her previous books, Doubt and Stay. She also wrote The Happiness Myth and The End of the Soul, which I feel like maybe I don't know too much about the latter two, but she's also a poet and a lover of poetry and a very amazing, the way that you look at words and text and find meaning is just so outside of my skill set. After reading The Wonder Paradox, I was just kind of I thought we should start a little bit on, if it's okay with you, on your background of kind of where you got to this place. And again, thank you so much for doing this with me. But okay, so
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's so good what you say about the, well, for me, writing the book, I had a model that knew what I was trying to offer people and some information I was trying to offer, but you're always looking for sort of added value and where you're not just blathering on, you're really doing something useful. And I found out from people only sort of as I went along how much they loved just my readings of the poem, so that I didn't realize that my expertise, which comes from those 10,000 hours they talk about, maybe 20,000 hours of reading poetry and writing it. And that combination makes it so I will often read something that seems pretty clear in what it's doing and how it's doing it. Don't get me wrong, I may have to read it a few times, but yeah, and I'll find out that it's really opaque to other people. And that's just, that's just luck. It means, oh, I have something to give. I can show people how this poem works a kind of magic on me. And if I take the person by the hand to the different places and then start again and take them to the hand to the different kind of ways something's set up, by the end, they're having that big experience too. And that was a revelation to me that I had that to offer.
Oh, you really do. And I think that kind of, let's go back to kind of let's start at the structure of the book. How you laid out, I mean, after the introduction, how is the book laid out in terms of events? Because it's really like finding rituals and poetry and how you can use them to sort of cope in the way or serve in the way that we've used prayer or other rituals or traditions. Can you kind of talk about how you decided what the structure of the book is?
Yeah, I did rewrite the book a bunch of times, not that rare in the world of book writing, trying to figure out, get the voice, figure out exactly what I was doing. But what it turned out to have grown out of was one of my early insights about the situation is that we read poetry at weddings and funerals, almost as a liturgy. People almost forget that that's not religious. There's certain poems that keep showing up, and partially because they are rather cryptic. Nobody walks away saying, oh, that poem told me this or that, and it could clash with something else. It's not that kind of poem. But there are very famous poems that just keep appearing, maybe guided by a movie, at weddings and funerals for decades on together. And that was my starting point. What are these poems doing there? Are they doing the same thing as prayer? Is prayer doing the same thing as some ancient poetry? Is it the other way around? What are we getting out of it that we lose if we just drop the words part? Maybe keep the music and some of the beautiful room. So it was all that kind of thinking, really starting from drilling down with what has compelled people to begin this very long-standing tradition now of having poetry at weddings and funerals. And then the question was, well, if you don't believe in God and you're trying to have a wedding, or you don't believe in certain religious aspects and you're trying to have a wedding, okay, we'll find your poem. Well, what are the other occasions at which people miss religion. I didn't go in the direction of when do they need a poem. I said, what do you lose if you don't mind losing God? But what else do you lose when you lose religion? And obviously, some of that is community, and some of it is meditation, some of it is ritual. I got the chapters into 20 chapters in 4 sections, somewhat organically, building from making a list of the questions that people had asked me over and over at my talks that were really personal social questions, not history of atheism questions. I would answer them in the moment, but I was collecting them and hearing them again and again, and not realizing quite why I was getting these emotional questions, because I did not set out on the road with a book like that. I'm doing it now. We'll see what they ask me now. But then it was really about history and philosophy. So the people could tell that I had a more poetic relationship to ritual, that I didn't downright hate everything about religion, that I considered religion to be something that smart human beings invented because it was just a way of collecting our poetic doings. When you hear that somebody who's an atheist is downright encouraging people to celebrate religious ritual if they enjoy it, and don't make your kids do it unless they enjoy it. I don't want to add anything to any kid's job, even with the coming of age chapter. Well, I'm coming off that. I even am not advocating that people do any more rituals than they do, though I bet they will if they read it and enjoy it, because it made me do it, reading it and thinking about it.
At the beginning
But,
of the,
yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
I was just going to say that the book really says a bunch of times, I'm really only helping you. I'm trying only to help you make sense of the reasons you enjoy some of the things you already do, and the reasons that you're conflicted about some of the things you already do. I'm really not trying to get you to do anymore. I really think just a slight change in how we think about these things can make us a lot happier and a lot more sort of personally powerful. We're more hooked into the world, and we can interact with it better.
Well, I don't want to say if I obviously agree. And I think that for me, there's like a itch or a deep longing for these sort of rituals that were traditionally sort of associated with religion. But
Yes.
you talk a lot about non-religious holidays at the beginning of the holiday section. And also, I feel like you created this sort of guide, a sort of goalpost system to like understand and evaluate what traditions work for you and what celebrations, what you enjoy about them. Can you talk a little bit about breaking down that process?
Yeah, I'm really happy to. No one else has asked me about that. They've stayed more in the atheism questions and the poetry questions, and this is really such an important question about how holidays work. And holidays are our sort of biggest transition, my biggest relationship to religion for many, many people. And yeah, I even ended up making up like a little poem guide. I created the concept of the cabinet of culture and said, look, what if every holiday has a cabinet of culture? And we're going to put the things that it has, the delicious foods that are only for that time, a song you only hear that time of year, all the different things that go along. And songs and food tend to be, and drink that are just for that holiday. Those are very popular. Even with a pretty empty cabinet, you might get those, but you might not. America feels very strongly and lovingly about Martin Luther King Day, and others of them may feel strongly about President's Day. Neither of these holidays have developed a full cabinet of culture. They're just too new, and they're outside religion, so they don't borrow those. And so if you wanted to make a holiday like Memorial Day a more impactful holiday, you would need to have some moment in the day where everybody does a little remembering. We don't have that. what we do have sometimes, there'll be a moment of silence or something, and that does something, that gives us a moment. But mostly it makes us go outside and cook and be with each other. And that is a very primordial gesture to do. We barely recognize that it mixes up the genders. It puts dad in charge of dinner usually. But it's more that notion that we are burning meat outside like we did for 200,000 years before we started to settle down. The idea that we would at least make ourselves do it every once in a while and expect ourselves to feel something. But that's where Memorial Day ends for many people, unless you have someone in the service you've lost, you're in a parade. So if you wanted to make something like that just a tiny bit more rich, more so that the day stood out from other days, I would start with food and drink. You know, we do have this cook outside. Is there a Memorial Day drink? No. Is there a Christmas drink? Yeah. There's eggnog. And in different cultures, you can see different kinds of Yule punch bowls and stuff. Christmas is old enough that wherever you look, it's going to have its own foods. It has its own colors almost worldwide. Many holidays have a color. St. Patrick's Day has green. Very easy way for a person who's not very involved to join in some small way. You can have a beer on St. Patrick's Day, or you can have some corned beef and hash, or you can wear some green and maybe say Happy St. Patrick's Day, maybe go to the parade. And that's pretty much it. You've topped out. There is no moment of sacred reflection built into that one. So Christmas sort of gets a moment of sacred reflection, and it gets most of the doodads, but it gets so overhyped that it falls into some of its own pitfalls. It loses meaning because it has too many toys. Whereas these other ones have some toys, but not enough to really give it any feel.
Can we pause really briefly and talk about sacred, the term, and the etymology behind it, and what, when you use it in a sort of non-religious sense, how it can still embody meaning, the sort of depth that it does?
I'm going to try to get myself to start right there and then expand, which is that sacred, our earliest meanings include the meaning of a treaty. It's this ancient particle of speech, and the sec. And, you know, a treaty is one of the most strange and holy and faith-based things you could do in a human society, right? It's based on the idea that we were fighting. If we needed a treaty, perhaps we were fighting unto death. We were killing each other's people. How do you get to a treaty from there? Human beings are terrible at forgetting that kind of thing. So if you can convince two groups of people to somehow forget the violence and be peaceful, you're never going to forget that moment. And you are going to take that sacredness, that treaty, and you're going to find you can hallow new ground. If you take the name of it or a piece of paper from it or the person who officiated to the next place, you will have more power for the success of it if your first one succeeded. I can't go back in time and know exactly how sec turns into sacred, but what I can say is that if I wanted to, I could have rehabilitated nearly the entire language. Even the word religios predates anything we would think of as religiosity and means a certain regularity, certain attentiveness. The idea of inspiration or spiritual. We like inspiration. I back away from spiritual because I don't want to be confusing to people. I really think it's important for people to see that poetry can do this whole job. You don't need an assist every once in a while from anything supernatural or imaginary. So I'm really clear. So I use sacred because I feel like people think of sacred, they don't necessarily think of spirit. I thought it was an easier way I could use a word that was mine to use and without much confusion. Also, I never say it without saying the natural sacred or the real sacred, the artistic sacred, but mostly I say the natural sacred. It's that which we all hold sacred. that which
I think,
is that, yeah.
oh, I think that, I mean, it's obvious, if it's not obvious to people by this point, that words really matter to you. And choice of words, there's a lot of intention that you, and understanding and collective understanding is really important. And throughout the Wonder Paradox, there are lots of different terms that you kind of unpack and then also create. And one of them is, you know where I'm going here, I think inner faithless. And it's kind of, if I understand it correctly, if I remember correctly, it's sort of a sort of continuation of the term humanist and atheist, and sometimes you use poetic realist. But I was wondering if you could, again, sort of maybe define those terms and why it's important for you to have them keep evolving.
Yeah. So I don't know that I needed them to keep evolving. It's just that nothing was working for me. So atheist, I was proud to say I was an atheist, and I still am now, but it just isn't a great way for me to describe myself, because it's not sort of, it has two problems. One, it defines me in the negative. I am not she that doesn't belong, that doesn't believe in your crazy idea that there's a man in the sky. I am she who does many, many things. You are she who believes in sky person, but I'm not going to define myself as against believing in sky person. It's just not, I'm being teasing a little there. I use the word sky person because there's a lot of people with much more sophisticated notions of God, which are basically that God is love. And when I talk to those people, we have very few differences. I recognize there's a lot of sophisticated ways of believing in God. But the idea of me being an atheist turned me off, in that it was defining myself by a negative that was so far-fetched. It just didn't seem reasonable. So I asked myself what I am. I think I'm a realist, a science and rationality realist. Real means if I have all the same conditions over here and you have the conditions over there, we're going to be able to have the same experience and report it with equal kinds of data. And that's how it is. If you see something that cannot happen like that again, you may have a special kind of scientific moment, but it's going to have to be corroborated by other kind of means before you can expect other people to give it enough credence. So for me, what am I? I'm a poetic realist. I'm a science and rational person who, though I read science and love science, I think of myself as living in the human world, negotiating human feelings and human conundrums and human paradoxes. That's where I live, in the world of poetry that is growing entirely throughout all of this world that we can talk of in terms of science and culture. That the interfaithless, I made a mistake, but I made myself laugh and I couldn't help it. I was looking for a word to say something like co-irreligionists. I believe that in all sorts of families of people who love each other, there are two or three who don't believe in the stuff that's getting said. I have tremendous anecdotal evidence about this. And they don't want to leave their families and go into a room and celebrate not believing what their family believed. They might, but only if they really don't like their families or they really were hurt. And many of them were hurt. And that is why a lot of the atheist groups exist. They were too hurt by religion. They're people who were raised beaten by the Bible and can't go back, especially now they don't believe in any of it and they see that there was child abuse involved. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying the people who I meet at these atheist get-togethers and I'm invited to speak at have certainly convinced me that there is a need for a movement that helps people transition out of religion they don't want to be in. A whole lot of things that if you live on either side of the country and you feel like you've always lived in a progressive world, you just don't know the walls that are against people getting out. They lose all their friends. They lose their jobs. They lose their kids. I mean, and most of them decide to lie to some degree and just keep pretending there's God so they can be around, you know. So what I'm saying is the idea of an interfaithless cracked me up, because I wanted to say, okay, those of us who don't believe, we're all doing different religious ritual with our different families. But I think we have something tremendously in common, that we care about ritual enough to show up, that we love our families, that we are trying to make a go of a world that we don't understand through ritual and family and holidays. And I just felt, my goodness, if we could just be the tiniest bit more aware that we're thinking about each other, that we remember that there are other people like ourselves out there, and that simple fact brings meaning. It heightens meaning. There's a lot of us out here. We've made a choice to stand around these candles with these people we love. Sometimes it's sad to hear them saying something that they believe is true that sounds like it might be nice to believe, but only if you're real scared of certain things. And if you're not going to get seduced into wanting those things. One does have to do a little bit of that work. I talk in the book about how, you know, I used to miss the idea of heaven and an afterlife as much as anybody. But once I learned enough about religions all over the world, and I come from a Jewish household, so we didn't put a big deal on heaven at all. Jews don't, or hell. There's a sort of vague afterlife you can join if you don't totally betray the faith. But nobody's like meeting old friends there. That's, you know, most religions do not have an afterlife. Christians look at all these different religions, even the good scholars, and they say, oh, karma, that must be sort of their afterlife. Well, if you don't remember anything about the life you had before, or the one you're going to, that's almost like noticing that new flowers grow up after the old ones die. It's not quite reincarnation. And that whole side of the world is trying to develop spiritually up to the point where they get to disappear, not stay forever. The experience of really learning about the world's religions and seeing where they put their anxiety, not about death, it has made me realize how much there is no abyss. The abyss of the afterlife is just us having stared at heaven for too long. It's like an afterglow in our eyes. It will disappear. Stop worrying about heaven. You stop worrying about death in quite the same way. The other religions don't just ignore death. They tell you what else to do. They point your attention elsewhere. And as long as it's sort of towards life, that's what you end up doing. Secularists and religionists have come up with the idea that if you can believe in a cause outside yourself, an almost magical transformation takes place where the thought of your own disappearance stops being so terrifying, especially as you get nearer it. And this is not something I've experienced so much on a firsthand basis, or really at all, but I talk to people, and I read, and it's incontrovertible that for many, many people, when you get to a certain age, your body starts to help you make some changes in how you want to live and be. Most of us would not say at age 5, I want a big, important job and I want lots of girlfriends or boyfriend. Like at 5, we don't care about that and we're scared of it. At 15, suddenly, sex and ambition is in a mind in a whole new way. What do you tell the 5-year-old? You start describing the beauty of the other? No, you say when you get there, you're going to get there. Does every 40-year-old need to be taken aside and said, look, maybe late nights aren't so much for you anymore. Let's take a look around who's going to the clubs. Looks like maybe they're younger than you. Is there anything you like on television? That doesn't happen. Now we fear it. I feared settling down when I was a wild teenager and in my 20s. I loved the wildness. I lived in New York City and had some wild friends, and I was in graduate school, so life was really straight, except when I was behaving badly and, you know, staying up all night in rock and roll clubs kind of thing, nothing all that fancy. But, you know, where you are right now, if where you are right now would not have seemed fantastic to who you are 20 years ago, how could you be making worries for your 20-year hence self? That is, if when you're old, you may be one of the people who does not want to face death, but you may be one of the many who expresses in many different ways, privately and publicly, that they would rather not die, if yes or no, but that they had a great life, that they wouldn't want to go on much longer in the body that they have, and that something changed. It's not all logic. Their body got them ready for that time of life. And
That's a really comforting thought, a way of thinking about it.
And it's really true. And we can thank our future self for taking care of us, because she will know something that we don't know. And we can thank our 10-year-old self, 10 years older than we are now, for not freaking jumping off the building like she contemplated 1 minute that evening. Like, thank you. I know the last year was really hard, but hey, I guess you got me set up in an apartment. Thanks. Like, the person that we were 10 years ago didn't know some of the life-sustaining things that you know now, but she stayed around for you. And she may not have known she had such a good friend in you, but we can realize now, at least, that we have a good friend in our own future self. Just her. She keeps learning.
This week has also been a particularly challenging week for me in terms of going back to your book, Stay, trying to rationalize in a world that, I mean, I stay for lots of reasons, but I feel like that one is particularly poignant about not knowing. I think the other logic that I took from Stay that really I keep in my back pocket is that, can you talk a little bit about what we owe the other people in our life?
You know, it's a tricky one. This one is very much more in Stay than in the Wonder Paradox, but Stay gave birth to the Wonder Paradox. There's no way around it. Stay, the work of writing Stay turned me into a person who was more tuned into my group. And my group, I started to feel the love from them in equal measure to the tears I had for those who were struggling. I said, if I'm crying for the other people, they must be crying for me. And that gave me just enough to work with, that there can be communities that we're not aware of, but we can make ourselves aware of them. And the human brain is so amazing. The poetic mind lets you feel friendship. So I do feel friendship with Keats and Dickinson. And yeah, they both talk about wanting to die sometimes, both of them. And this was before cell phones and Instagram fights and, you know, the way we get knocked around today. Their lives were so much more peaceful in so many ways, right? And yet, the idea that maybe this is just all too much, they think about it and they both crawl out of it, but they also write their way through it, so that, you know, reading these poems can be, you know, there's one Dickinson poem that begins, I measure every grief I meet with wild, engaging eyes. I wonder if it hefts like mine or has a smaller size. She just keeps going through what she looks into their eyes and wonders, if they had a choice to die. She just says it in this way that you can't even believe someone in the late 19th century is just saying, I look into this person's eyes and I wonder, I think they might want to die as much as I do. Like, whoa, but she says it just deep enough, right? I think that, first of all, T.S. Eliot said April is the cruelest month for a good reason. He was saying it just to you. So I'm going to tell you what he meant. He said April is cruelest month, Carissa, because a lot of us are really sensitive people who feel a lot of pain as well as good. And then when the winter comes, a lot of the kind of joyous easiness settles down. And then here comes along April, and the melancholy people like you and me, just trying to be happy that, look, everybody else is sad. Okay, this is okay. And then April comes, sprouting flowers, and the kids are singing, and the teenagers are chasing each other, and April is the cruelest month, pushing dead lilacs out of the ground. I'm a dead lilac, and I wanted to stay a dead lilac for a minute, and everybody else is dancing, and suddenly I'm sad. Well, wasn't I waiting for spring too? Yes. Objectively, am I happier in spring? Yes. But, you know, I don't know what you're going through right now, but the challenge of the world reawakening and feeling like we're supposed to be in a certain place for it, especially when we felt like we were waiting for it, and then it comes, it's just always more complicated.
Yeah, expectations really get the best of me. And I think I have heard April is the cruelest month before, and I forgot about it. So
yeah, it's the first line of The Wasteland.
There
Yes,
was
Elliot.
something I feel like when I was preparing for this and I listened to a couple other interviews of you, people are very in awe of you and come to you for, I think, the priest of unbelief.
Yeah.
Is that what they call
I
you?
say it differently sometimes, but yes, an atheist priest, yes, for sure. An atheist rabbi, I get.
But I think the thing that I get a lot as a person who, it really depends on how you define the terms. But I think that maybe we have similar understandings. I'll just go with atheist. I get a lot at the time, how can you be moral or without a God, or how does morality work? And I think something in the wonder paradox, you talk about that, and then you also talk about how you can choose how you have agency in choosing a moral code, which I think is really appealing.
Yeah,
I
think
can
it's
you
really
kind of talk
appealing
about?
too. Yeah,
can you talk about? Sorry, those are kind of two.
They are
two
two, and I
tangents.
put them into chapters, and so I'll just start there and say that I was trying to make them into one chapter, but they wouldn't cohere, and I realized they had different, even though they seemed so similar, they had something that was different enough that I had to do it that way. So what I have is a chapter on code poems, which are the kind of moral code that you can choose. And then I have a chapter on morality and how it makes sense to talk about non-believing morality. So if you'll help me not forget, I'm going to start with the first one and come back to the second. So the idea of choosing a code was sort of wonderful to me. I noticed that there are code poems and poems that sort of say, I am this and I am that. I believe this and I believe that. And there's some famous American ones that are not really famous poems. They're sort of smushed together versions of better ones. But the idea that there are poems that tell people, here's how I want to live, is something I think Americans are a little less aware of, but more in the rest of the world. And what is interesting that you spoke to just then is that when you choose your own code, you are likely to see that all the codes have some major moral ideas in common. Of course, we all basically believe the same things about how to treat other people with respect and make a good life. But there are profound differences in the details, so that if there's a code that says, well, for instance, the Japanese code of the samurai includes the note that not only do you go out and help, but if you're having a peaceful day and no one needs your help, your job as a samurai is to get up and go look for the person who needs help. I love that for both the reason of that it's that it adds a question to all the other code poems that say, don't go looking for trouble, but if it comes, fight for the right. But this one says, no, go looking for trouble. You're strong and can help someone. One of the things I love about it is that it allows itself to imagine the greater and greater and greater world needing help, rather than condensing it down to, I'm just trying to get a quiet household for myself. That tiny difference isn't going to come up all that much. And yet there are moments for all of us, I've seen them in real life and movies and television, where somebody doesn't know what to do. And then they remember there was one rule their dad gave them, family first, or, they're most potent when there is some other idea, work first, family first, land is king, cash is king, something. So that when you're not sure, especially with moral issues, you have a sense that I've thought this through, and at least if everything fails, and it often does, if everything fails, I can look back and say, oh, I lived this life. And I think we can all do that right now, in a way, that there were probably things you held true to that you thought were virtuous, that were the virtue you decided to be the steward of. And you can look back on your life and say, I may have messed up a lot of things, and maybe I would have won if I'd have sacrificed this, but I wasn't going to sacrifice this, and I didn't, and I'm a human being, Mm-hmm. And that's a thing. That's a thing. What could it be better, to have gotten rich and famous, or to have been a human being when you were here, to have made choices about what mattered to you? So, yeah. Do you want to?
I think I know we have another, I know there's a second part to this question, right. But I tangentially also wanted to ask you about how critical thinking plays into this, and if there's a framework for choosing what we want to continue on, or to sort of be the scaffolding of the code.
Yeah, I say this in all the chapters, and maybe it's more true here or there, but I haven't really. What seems to be true to me is that the specific choosing doesn't have to be done with the utmost care. What I'm trying to say is there are already enough brilliant poems for you to make a wonderful life, having chosen 20 different sets of them with no overlaps. But because it's your life, you are going to choose your 12 to 20. In the question of finding a poem for grief, say, I suggest you find 5 poems that touch on something to do with grief, and then just pick one out of it. Obviously, some people already have their grief poem set up, and some people already know which ones they would want to choose from, but I'm always speaking to the person who has the least experience with it, and I'm saying, what?
Oh, no, I'm that person.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The least experienced person might think, oh, you have to do all this research and pick the perfect thing. And they're going to get very frustrated because poems won't stay on topic or even in tone. And so the thing you love and need to hear is juxtaposed with something that sort of you don't want. Mm-hmm. So what I want to tell people is that most great poems are going to be a mixed bag of things that you love and are either frightened by or just don't see anything in. There are so many great poems that you don't have to be terribly precise. There are many poems that mention Christmas. If you get one, it's likely to not be the happiest Christmas poem. Why? Because the happy Christmas poem has been written. No poet sits down and says, I'm at Christmas. I'll go in the other room and stop having fun. which I'm having a great time, I'll just go write up a poem. Like, it's just, you could see that the potential for writing a sad Christmas poem is much bigger. The person who's wandering off sad, right, to do the poem writing. So what do you get from a Christmas poem that says Christmas in it? Probably an intimate look into someone else's Christmas, which is probably enough to keep you going. Just to see, just to hear that real voice that someone put into a poem saying why it isn't quite exactly right and what they were hoping for. Even that can be a profound experience. I really tried it a bunch of different ways. I put the poems that I put in the book mean profound things to this project and to me, but I did try sometimes by my method to just go to an anthology, pick 5 poems that seemed sort of on a subject, choose one out of them, and then consider myself a little married to it for a while. And I never had that do anything less than be amazing. You know, the poem unfolds. You find out later. Now, you can up the ante by always making sure you choose great poems by world famous poets. And I very much want people to choose from world poetry. You can't go wrong. And then to also choose some poems from the people around you who are writing poems right now, because they're going to speak to your life in a more specific way.
I love the idea of sort of making a commitment to a poem before you really know its complexity. Yeah. I want to go back to the question on having morality without God, or the second part of the first question. Because we're running out of time, and I really there's a couple of more questions that
so I'll answer this one quickly. It's almost hilarious that we live in a basically Christian country that looks back to its origins of morality being actually written in stone, because that is the one thing that morality is not. It is like love. It has competing has competing fields, different kinds of love and different kinds of moments that need you. And you must constantly suss what you're getting and what you're giving, all of those tiny little adjustments that we do not say, oh, love doesn't exist because there's no simple rule for it. No, part of love is that I have to figure out how much time I give my parents, how much my kids, how much my friends, how much my spouse. That struggle with, I've lost the thread just a little bit. Oh, that I was just trying to say that the moral poetry is poetry, I feel, that wakens up your sense that this world must be fixed, that the pain in the world beyond your own is intolerable. Yeah, for me, I guess on some profound level, the only true way to respond morally to the pain in this world is to start screaming and never stop. I mean, just think about slavery. Just think about that. We should all be screaming. That can't have happened for so long. And in each individual case, as horrific as anything you could think, you know, just long before I made this point, Mark Twain said, if there's a God, he's an evil one, because I've seen what tsetse flies do to African babies. They just attack their eyes and then they suffer horribly and then they die. What father does that? So Mark Twain said, no on the father thing. No. And I keep asking people, if morality guy shows up in my living room and tells me why the baby got beaten to death, how's he going to change me? I think I'm the moral guy in the center saying, no, not good enough. No, not good enough. Similarly, we package these outrages or queries and we say, oh, God has it, don't worry. Why would it make a difference if God were watching and he had a meaning? We're doing all this stuff down here and we feel a little watched by God and we feel like he's got the point of it all. Now take him away. Well, he was never here. So he was never the source of meaning. He was never the source of morality. We were never doing rituals for him. All of this was always for us.
For us.
So what's missing if he goes? What can he with his magical eternal eyes do to us by taking them away? I really feel I talk to people who are mourning a loved one and they feel if only God had been watching. They don't need the afterlife, but this all just disappeared. It didn't disappear. It certainly can. It happened. And it happened with the same amount of force and reality as if some ethereal creature was up there memorizing it for eternity. Like, what good does that do us? We don't understand it. We've just said, okay, maybe there's a parental figure that understands things the way, but that's not what's really going on here. What's going on here is much more beautiful and strange. There have been millennia of us trying to help each other. I mean, we try to kill each other too, but most of that material just disappears. We don't need it. But we save anything that gives us a taste of how we could love each other, how we can live, how we can build despite the facts of ending, how we can overcome the paradoxes that sometimes freeze us in our tracks. How can I be ambitious and mortal? It makes you think maybe I shouldn't do anything. Maybe I'm going to die and then it all goes away, and everything that you could actually do takes unbelievable work. There's almost nothing you get easy. So how am I supposed to do that? And poetry can ground us back into that. It shows us where the ground is and you can step on it.
Oh no, I mean, I'm definitely a believer as a person who very much longs for the ritual and delights in words, but who's always felt poetry was a little bit outside of my reach in terms of understanding and comprehension. I interviewed Jericho Brown once, and he spoke about how poems, it was really reassuring how poems can mean whatever you get from them, that you just have to trust yourself. And I found that really comforting. There are two more questions I wanted to ask you, and we only have a couple more minutes. And I wanted to ask you about finding, I think it was in the introduction, and then the last question will be about, I wanted to read the last paragraph from the book, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
About having meaning. There's, I think, in sort of as a follow-up to how can one have morality without a God? Can we talk a little bit about, I think people ask you about, how do you have meaning? How do you have meaning, and what is meaning without a supernatural power?
Yes. Yeah. It's a great question. I always start with the notion when anyone asks questions in this sort of territory that meaning we have in abundance, right? I mean, it matters to me how the rest of my day goes. I mean, I have tremendous meaning just in this one little person in Brooklyn. And I know that every person I meet has a whole scale of profoundly meaningful things to them, in the abstract to profoundly human. We are all buckets of too much meaning. We just have to take our meaning seriously. And the more we can notice what's in common between them, the better we do. And I always follow up with pointing out that justice we do not have in abundance. We have the desire for it sometimes, but meaning, however, we have. Meaning was never something we needed to come from God. We just need to have some sense about the relational part. And that's what I'm going to jump to in terms of what real meaning is, to the best of my understanding at this moment. I'm a solitary person. And so I'm always telling people when I'm trying to be wise to go be with people, because I prefer to be alone. And I think I need to be encouraged to go have that experience, which I always find so profound, to be with other people. I happen to be very good at being on my own. My brain is sensitive, doesn't like interruption in a certain kind of way. So there's that part, but I just have projects. I'm an indoor cat with tons of projects, and I'm excited about one of my projects all the time. And so it's I who needs to be told to go and be with people. Nevertheless, I have come to believe that we exist relationally, that there's almost nothing that we are without talking to each other. I I am solitary, but I'm solitary in the most steeped in other people's thoughts way you could be, constantly reading and listening and researching and rethinking and returning to people and asking questions. But honey, this is what I think we live for. I think real meaning, intellectual, but also emotional, happens in these interactions, whether we're in the same room or not. That last night I was talking about poetry with my daughter. She came home from high school with a poem that she had some feelings about, but she had to write about. She didn't have. As soon as we started talking, it was the most rich, beautiful conversation. Neither of us wanted it to stop. And I stopped her and said, this is what the wonder paradox is about. I tried to get onto the page the experience of a dialectic, for us to have that memory of, oh, I read this and it made me feel a certain way, and I thought of that line. And then you get someone saying what they thought, and your internal experience gets to bounce off of that. And I try to keep things loose enough so that the reader's never shoved away by my interpretation, but rather invited in to see what they see. And yeah, the book's only been out a little while, but I'm hearing from people that their creative process is growing. People are back at work. And I'm like, wow, okay, I didn't mean it as a pep talk to be back at work, but I just feel like when you can start to see some of these things clearer, you can make a plan. And I think there's no question that poetry is very solitary, but it is the great revealer that really reality only happens relationally.
I think it's sort of the challenge of adulthood and being raised in an individualistic culture that relies,
that's the big one. Yeah.
Relies a lot on the existence of a singular self.
Yep.
And for me, I also find that, I don't know if this is like mentally healthy or not to admit, but my sense of self, it's not that I don't think I have like a personality disorder, but it changes depending on who I'm with. And it also is a compilation of all of the interactions that I've had throughout my life. And so the idea of it being singular, I guess, could work in a sense of like a curatorial sense.
Right. Right.
But not in a like actually reflective of how the nature of how life works. I wanted, okay, so I'm gonna pull out my book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like really debating if I should my father's also a huge fan of yours.
Oh, wonderful.
He runs a Unitarian bookstore.
Right. You told me this and I got all excited. That's right.
In Minneapolis, but he really wanted me to ask you a question, but I actually think I may have lost it. But anyway, I want to read from the Emergency and Wisdoms, the last. Actually, would you be willing to read it? Sorry, I got all excited about reading it, but I feel like it would come out so much better.
I don't know. It's up to you, but I'm happy to.
Could you start with maybe, is it too far to go back to I'm not saying I manage even as well as anybody?
Where are we? We're on page 321.
Yep, 321.
Here we are. Yeah.
And then read us to the end.
So this is the chapter on morality and what the idea of the good is. I'm not saying I manage even as well as anybody to do what I ought to at times, but I'm not here for nothing. And to further the good holds up to the most scrutiny. Some of us live seeking poetic truth in music, for example, and some prize scientific discovery. Many live for romantic and family love too. But what the hell is it all about if we aren't also in pursuit of goodness? How about if all I mean by good is knew what good was and preferred it? I think I have it. Knew the feeling of good and adored it and tried at least to find out more about it, and could be at many times driven like a windy leaf around it. Good. The trying is the sacred. In whatever broken way, we're trying together. You are a miracle for trying. Your trying might be the miracle that matters.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I really needed this book. And
So glad. You're really touching me and making me feel so, like I was just saying, so connected. Are we still plugged in? Do you want to talk about what's going on with you a little?
oh no, I can't
Just
do
shit.
anything about it.
Yeah.
So I'm at this point of avoidance. I'm also
Yeah.
having, or my partner is also having some health issues, so I could really relate to you talking about
Yeah.
this morning. But we don't really have any answers yet, so it's just
Right.
like I think also I know you're on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, and I'm sure the East Coast is having issues, weather issues, but here it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Just
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. And we don't realize how much everything is while we're going through it. I've been trying to teach myself this lesson in this last bunch of days. My book came out and I couldn't help expecting, no matter how wise I think I am, I thought the book would come out and everybody would love me and the whole thing would be over. You know what I mean? Like I just thought somehow, and it's my 8th book. I should know better that even when it happens, it doesn't happen right away. But what was I doing? Comparing myself up. Who do you know about? Successful people. You check on how their book's doing. It's killing yours. How do you feel? I felt like I had no right to complain, but I felt like something had to change. I was so confused. And then I just started talking to myself. Nope, didn't start that way. Always starts trying to cheer someone else up. Then I realized the advice is meant for me. I'm never good at cheering myself. I cheer up my daughter and then I hear the words, oh, I'm in a transition period. I'm going to look back on this and think of it as very different than how I'm going through it. My job is just to walk the dog right now. Like some simple, human beings have to process information. You can't speed it up very much. Sometimes you're in spin cycle. Yeah. And I think we do a lot better when we just remember, oh, if someone else were going through this, I'd tell them to chill out and wait. A few days is going to feel different. It doesn't feel that way at first. When we first heard John was sick, all I could say was, I'm in shock. Those were my words. I would say to her, I'm in shock. I'm in shock. I used that for how's the weather. I was just in shock. I was afraid they'd see it on my face. And so I was just saying, oh, my husband's sick. I'm in shock. And then eventually you notice that you're not saying the words I'm in shock. So you must be in a little less shock. But and these are two, like my husband's been super healthy for the longest time. And I've been writing this book for 8 years and I don't have a job. And I kind of wish I did. I was trying to get a regular salary job so as to not have to worry about bills. But then I stopped because trying to get a job or grants takes as much time as writing a book. So I just said, if I can scrape by with little teaching and this and that, I'm going to just write the book. And then it took 3 times longer than I thought it would, but that's only because it, came out better. I would have never been able to write this book if I'd have gotten any of those jobs I wanted so bad. Never, not longer, never. I wouldn't have been able to write Stay either.
What's your Enneagram?
Oh, that's so funny. I think that I'm the wrong age category and I never exactly figured it out. Like I never did it. I never took it seriously and did it.
It's not
I know it's not age. It's just like I first heard about it when I was already in graduate school. And I feel like people hear about it when they're younger, like you do it. I'm sure that I'm some sort of weird introvert pretending to be an outrovert.
I mean, I
don't know. I'd have to do the test. I'm sure I did it at one point, but just why? What's yours? Is it interesting?
No, I mean, it's not interesting. It just felt like it was this sense of, I was so opposed to the truth of what the quiz said. And I just like it as a system of evaluating motivations or different causes, or different underlying beliefs.
Yeah, that's true.
Behavior.
Anything that looks at those.
But I think it's like there's a one that's like a archetype of a tortured artist, and I hate that metaphor, but it describes me when I'm really honest to a T, of like wanting to feel unique. And I can relate to the anticlimactic book release in the sense that, like, I also, every time I have an exhibition, I think, oh my gosh, it's gonna sell out. I'm gonna get some recognition, and the world is gonna change, and then I get the after show blues.
Yeah.
But there's something about the one that I am, that like wants to be unique and recognized in a world that actually, it's like fundamentally at odds with the specialness of us all, and also the not specialness of us all.
Yeah.
But that's why I was curious about your Enneagram.
Yeah. No, these questions are certainly, fascinating to me. I'm saying this to my kids last night. When we feel bad, I often have someone imagine that they're living in the size town that most people through history have lived in, right? About 200 people, either a group of wandering beings, whatever. In a group of 200 people, there's really only going to be 2 or 3 musical ones, 1 or 2 that likes to give a speech, 1 or 2 fast ones, 1 or 2 super kind, 1 or 2 super strategic. That is, the first time I remember sitting behind a room saying, I'm depressed and I cannot force myself to undepress, I remember thinking that if someone had slipped a piece of paper under the door and said, we desperately need a drawing and a poem for this wedding down the block, and there's no one else who could do it, you're our only poet drawer, I felt like I'd get out of the bed. I felt like there was one piece of that depression that wasn't biochemical, and that was that I just didn't feel needed. And I did this little experiment and imagined myself needed. I didn't even have to force myself to do something. I wanted to. But what are we supposed to do? Now, this is a technological problem. I know I've been going on too long, but I'm going to tell you this quick little history story, okay?
I'm in.
Once upon a time, we all lived in these small towns, and the best musician was your sister, because she was best and they came and listened, and you had music parties at your house. You bang on the back of a thing because they didn't have a drummer. You're part of it. Then comes a time where transportation's good enough and you get some visits from other places. People come in and they play some music. Now you find out there's really good music out there, and you have home music and the great music that you wait to visit or go to its concert. But then we get recordings. And just as we got recordings, we got the phone. And this is what's so curious, that there were futuristic, this one book, Looking Backwards, very popular book at the end of the 19th century, pretending it was the year 2000 and looking backwards. And what he believes is going to happen is music will be transformed not by recording, that never occurred to him, by the phone. He imagined that there would be orchestras playing every kind of music in rooms all over. And if you wanted music, you would dial in and listen to the live music. Now, what would have happened if it had gone that way? I've thought a lot about this, but not written about it. I'm dying to at some point, because what would happen is we would need more musicians. We would still be listening to live, not recorded, even when we had a party. There just would be different things. We'd need more musicians for sure. Instead, we went with a kind of perfection. We'll get the very best singers and musicians. We'll record them and we'll suppress everything else. Who wants to listen to your sister now? She's not as good as Van Halen. Well, who needed that? In some ways, it was better when it was your sister and you were expected to play the beat. So the different ways that technology squeezed us, that changes. It's going to squeeze in different ways. There could be a way in which from now on we do only want to listen to live music and the whole recorded industry goes under. We listen to it and sounds canned and bizarre, like we'd forgotten to go to parties and we're only reading books together or something, like interact, do something, make music. What are you doing? Just listening? 99% of us are just listening, when it used to be probably more people making the music than less, right? So my point is that, who knows what my point is? I started too long ago. Oh, I told you the story to say, that the the ways that that technology changes how valuable we are. The technology changes too. Look at how you found a way in this new technology to reach out and have rather intimate, private conversations, but for a larger category of audience. And you've managed to do it in a way that's really compelling, because you're talking to people and they like you and they like who you talk to. And that's very different than if we all only had 5 choices. You go to that person's show or that person's show and they have this very distant conversation that's very canned, right? So yeah, I mean, you should notice how much good you're doing. I think you'll feel better if you can concentrate on the fact that there's probably somebody, listen to me, there's probably someone alive right now who wouldn't be without you. I know it's a little weird because I actually get letters to that effect because I wrote a book saying don't kill yourself. So people write back and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that reason. Thank you so much. I'm not going to kill myself. So when you get a letter like that, it really helps you. It lets you know, at least for one full day, you do not feel like a waste of space. You saved somebody. It's amazingly more potent than any other award, money, nothing. Oh, I helped that person. Keeps me up. I'm 100% sure you're keeping some people up. 100% sure.
So I feel like this is also the advice that I want to turn back at you for this moment. Just
Thank
that you said that you were the advice that you give out previously often is what you need to hear. In return, I do also think, not to like go off on the riff of music, that I think that technology, it's such a shame that, I mean, has brought us all together, but at the same time, it's so limiting of the realm of possibilities to only have this high bar of perfection. And I want to live in a world of experimentation. I want to be in a room with people and have our bodies rhythmically sway and eye contact connect over this melody that just reminds us of that we're not in this alone. And I think that it's really sad to me to think about. Sorry, this morning we were listening, my daughter at the dentist found Katy Perry, and it's 3, and now we for the past week have only been listening to Katy Perry, and there's a joy in it, but there's also a universality in it, but it's also a limiting, like a song, a formulaic ness that doesn't fit every moment. And I definitely think the lack of value that I think Americans place on where they spend their money and their time, and are told that you can't make a living as in music or art or writing, I think is really detrimental
for sure
to our output.
Yeah, but I do think that the technologies we're working with now are more, at least in the short run, I think they're going to help. You know, in the short run, I hear new music on Instagram that I wouldn't hear, and sometimes I follow them for a little while, and they're people playing music in their basement, whereas I would never hear that in some other kinds of circumstances. But yeah, what you're saying is so true, and it's not only always perfectionism. Sometimes it's simply that algorithms thing of, because I've read studies where if you don't show people what other people have been voting up, the group of favorite songs at the top is huge compared to if people see what other people have said they like.
Again, going back to the sort of meaning is in the relationships and how we understand it. Like, how can you divorce like even taste? I mean, and understand the complexities of it. Did you read Virginia Heffernan Magic and Loss?
I did. Yeah, when it came out, it was a while ago.
Yeah, I loved how she talked about how technology was changing us in this sort of miraculous ways, but also the sort of balance of what we're losing from it.
I remember she to the extent that I remember the book, I remember intensely the feeling that she had, that it felt so much more free in its beginning years. And I was sort of around for that, but I was in graduate school so I wasn't I didn't have a lot of room to play with the culture. It's like I had to catch up a little bit afterwards. So yeah, yeah, I think that there's no question that a person today could do a lot of stuff and try a lot of stuff and hear a lot of stuff. It's just, as you say, there's the motivation is too complex, and there are too many messages saying you can't make it and you must make it. It's yeah. I was just saying
say
no, just that some days I feel both intensely and ashamedly that I'm not trying hard enough and that I'm trying much too hard. There's nothing you can do on a day like that. You know what I mean?
you just get some, you got to buy yourself some sunflowers and
That's right. The sunflowers
marvel
help.
in
The
delight of
sunflowers
them.
help. Yeah.
Are you doing a book tour for this?
Not really. I would have if they'd said it, but I don't think anybody's ever really sent me on a book tour. What happens instead, I don't really know the logic of book tours. I think a certain kind of fame makes them doable. But I also think that some authors almost insist on them, and I never have. I live in New York City, and don't worry about it. I set up some things to try to keep the sound from bouncing around, so my teenager has to get through the obstacle. Yeah, where were we just? I'm sorry.
Oh, book tours.
Book tours. Yeah, I think there's people who are either famous or beg for book tour, but living in New York City, you feel like you really can do an awful lot from home, and I sort of prefer to. But yeah, I imagine that requests will come in and I'll be touring around. But at this moment, I'm sort of waiting for them.
Okay, well, if I can request you to one, it'd be amazing if
Where?
you could.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you should do one at Book Passage in San Francisco.
Okay.
Not that you.
There's lots of places, I'm sure.
I just feel like they have really good book events.
That's wonderful. I will look them up. Look, what used to happen was somebody would engage me for a doubt talk, and they'd be able to pay enough for it to be doable. And then once I was in a city, I would do whatever anybody needed. Yeah. And sometimes different departments would put together a stipend for me so that I could come and spend a weekend and talk to different classes and stuff. Yeah. And I'm hoping that starts up again, the pandemic.
I hope it does too.
We'll see.
I hope it does
I love
too.
talking to people.
Well, I love this book, and thank you for going so much longer. I know I told you we'd be over at 10, and now it's somehow time has just sort of flowed without my consent.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you for creating content that I can genuinely. The nice thing about this Substack is I can choose whatever I want. And I'm not really beholden to anything. And so I really, really appreciate what you're doing, having these conversations. Again, thinking about all the years that I've been performing these rituals with the people who are closest to me, but never talking about the nuances of what that faith, the origins of the faith, and how the specifics sort of come together. And it's crazy how radically different all of our views are when we talk about it.
Yeah. And yet some undertone, you can all say, it's just nice to feel like we're renewing the year, or nice to feel like, even though I don't fast, I just do get a feel like I get a fresh start after this. And just that can be very meaningful. And we just don't have the conversations. You're right. Yeah.
Happy equinox.
Happy equinox.
Anyway,
this was great.
Thank you, Jennifer. Take good care.
You're such a doll. Thank you. Bye-bye. We'll talk soon.